Before we dive into the hottest news topics, if you love Flash Drive, make sure you're following us on Spotify and Apple to know as soon as any new content drops.
To be honest, obviously disappointed about the election result, and I know many of your viewers were too, but being able to reconnect with my community, my family, with friends and our life down here in the Shire has been a real joy.
Scott Morrison returns to the headlines to reflect on why he lost. Plus, it's the controversy that has lit up the internet. Did Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine at the Venice Film Festival? And
you feel like it's the whole world. You feel like everyone hates you. You feel like, you don't understand why you're being subjected to it, and that really can really screw with your confidence.
Sky News host and radio star Erin Molan joins the podcast to discuss her brave campaign against online hate. I'm J.Law, welcome to Flash Drive, and I'm pleased to welcome back friend of the pod and news.com.au deputy editor Liz Burke. Thanks for being here, Liz.
Thanks for having me back.
Got a lot of good feedback from your couple of episodes you did a while back.
Good, so huge relief, thank you.
Yeah, you killed it. Look, good to have you. So obviously you have a really crucial leading role in the biggest news website in Australia, news.com.au. Tell us, what have those millions of readers been getting into this week?
It's been really varied this week, like it always is when you've got, quite a few million eyes on you, then not everyone's going to be into the same thing. But the US Open's been massive, obviously Kyrgios's games in particular. Yesterday we had the interest rates decision from the RBA, so that's always a big one. Everyone's, very into cost of living right now, how those sorts of things are going to affect them. But the big one that's sort of come out of nowhere is the topic that we're going to be discussing a little bit later, the whole Don't Worry Darling premiere saga drama.
I know, right? It's pretty juicy, so we're going to have to get into it. I've just done a crash course on all of the ins and outs of this, so bear with me if I don't know all the details, but we're going to get into it a bit later on.
I did have to study a little bit too.
We're going to sound like experts soon enough, don't worry. But first, let's get into maybe what's a more comfortable space for us, federal politics. Scott Morrison, he was back in the spotlight on Monday to give his first TV interview since being booted out of the Prime Ministership. He sat down with Paul Murray on Sky News Australia and reflected on his government's achievements. He revealed what he's getting into now as a humble backbencher and gave some insight into why he thinks he lost the election. Let's have a bit of a listen.
No, I'm not blowing up at the television because, the country, we had an election, the government changed hands. It's now their go. They made a whole bunch of commitments about what they were going to do, so get on and do it, and let's see how you go. And for the sake of the country, I hope you do well.
Liz, did you get a chance to catch the interview? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I watched it. Look, it was pretty, soft, I guess, pretty favourable. It wasn't a real interrogation, but I don't think that's what we were expecting or, what the viewers probably wanted to see at that moment. It was more of a, where is he now kind of catch up. It was very much on his turf. It was in, a place of his choosing. The opening line, I think, was quite telling. He said that he was disappointed with the election result, but said to Paul Murray, I know that many of your viewers were too. So I think he knew that he kind of had a bit of a sympathetic ear there. And then another thing that jumped out to me that was pretty early on in the interview was when the whole issue about him, taking on multiple portfolios in secret, which has actually, turned into quite a serious issue and will continue to be. That was referred to as, if I recall correctly, I think the multiple ministries thing. And, Scott Morrison said, I've said what I had to say about that, and it was sort of left at that. So I think that kind of tells you that, it was a bit more of a friendly catch-up than a real interrogation. But yeah, I mean, interesting to hear from him after a few months.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's a fair comment. It was quite a sympathetic hearing. Paul Murray, he's pretty much a ScoMo fan and a friend of his. But yeah, so not really like a Lee Sales style grilling, but even in that more comfortable, more friendly interview style, there were some things that I found very interesting. one of the things that Scott Morrison, when he was asked about essentially why he lost, he didn't really answer it directly, but then he went on to kind of reflect about the year that was 2021 and how that, he thinks, really turned Australia's opinion on him. He cited things like the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine was recommended not for all Australians anymore. He talked about the resurgence of the Omicron wave, and he talked about how Australia kind of got to realise that the states have more power than the federal government does in this kind of pandemic situation. So I thought that was an interesting insight from him.
Yeah.
Do you think that is why he lost the election?
I think it's probably a bit rich of him to claim that, because in the very same interview, I think just before he was asked about this, you know, the reason that he thought he lost the election, and he started naming all of these reasons that were to do with, you know, essentially his leadership throughout the pandemic. I think just before that, there was, you know, he was talking about how successful Australia was during that period. And, you know, the way he framed it, I think what he meant by that was how successful his leadership was. He said, you know, something like, you know, people were looking to Australia from around the world, and, you know, seeing how we got through that period and going, wow, how did you do that? So that's, you know, on one hand, lumping a whole lot of praise on himself for how he handled it, but then on the other hand, saying, you know, this was a really difficult period and that's why I lost. Like, that kind of doesn't really square up to me. But there was, you know, there's no doubt that it was a massively, it was a really strange time. It was a tumultuous period for Australia, for governments, for him as a leader. And I think there's definitely something to it that we got to know, you know, the public got to know Scott Morrison as a leader, as a Prime Minister, on a level that, you know, we haven't really ever before. Like, no leader has had that kind of visibility and that kind of, you know, I guess, relationship with the public. Like, no one's sat down and watched an hour-long press conference, you know, every week or every few days with John Howard or any other, you know, with Julia Gillard, with any other of the previous leaders. So I think definitely during that period, people got to form their opinion of him and maybe applied some more scrutiny, a lot more scrutiny than they would have to previous leaders. But yeah, I just think it's a bit rich that he's on one hand saying like, oh, look how great I was, what a success story. Everyone from other countries thinks it's so fantastic. But then, you know, saying, oh, but that's why I got voted out. Like, mate, doesn't really add up to me. And there were a few other issues.
Yeah, he was having a bit of a bob each way. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think there were a lot of things towards the end of his prime ministership, once we were a little bit over COVID, that were probably more critical. You know, things like accountability and things about even his personality. I think a lot of people were off him by the end, wouldn't you say?
Time. And there was, you know, economically, sort of hip pocket wise, there was a lot going on, and there was just dissatisfaction with the leadership there. And there was obviously the crucial, like what's kind of been rounded up as the, you know, the women issue, you know, the accountability, the issues that were plaguing Parliament House. And then, you know, I think that was reflected in the number of independents and the number of female candidates that were actually voted in. Like, that was massive. But yeah, a lot going on. Wasn't just one thing, and it definitely wasn't the pandemic that he's kind of saying that Australia won.
Liz, I thought that to his credit, he had some really nice things to say about his family and his daughters and about the toll that the Prime Ministership has taken on them. He said something along the lines of that, you know, he's a volunteer, his family are conscripts. And I thought that was nice to see him pay tribute to them and the sacrifices they made for him to have this huge role, which would have been, you know, say what you will about Scott Morrison, he worked really bloody hard, and it would have been all-consuming of his life. Totally.
I wouldn't wish being, you know, a politician's partner or child, any family member on anyone. It sounds awful. Like, when you're the Prime Minister, yes, I imagine that you're just, you know, a completely absent parent partner for a lot of the time. Like, you're literally just not there and are probably taking calls 24/7 from everyone else. So you kind of, you have to put your family to the side at some time. But even at, not even at those levels, like when you're, when you're an MP, you're kind of campaigning constantly, like not even within a ministry, like you go to like a school fete or something on the weekend, like chances are the local MP is going to be there. And that's that's outside of, dealing with all the issues that they have to do in their kind of day to day. They have to do so much. They have to put in so much face time with the community. And it's just, I guess it's worth it if you become Prime Minister and that's what you want to do and you kind of, want to make a big difference to policy and everything. But man, I would not encourage my partner. I would not, like, that's the one place that I would put my foot down and be like, nah, mate, you're not going into politics.
Yeah, lucky Chris.
I've made it very clear, don't worry.
Okay, good. And especially for like Jenny Morrison, because she's sort of on the record as saying she's not interested in politics in the slightest. You could sort of tell whenever she was clearly forced into doing interviews that she didn't want to be there. That's not her jam, right?
Yeah. But, she played the role that I guess she, had clearly agreed to, and she was the main character in some of those interviews. So I think, there's a lot of sacrifices that family's made. But I think a lot of them, they kind of did so voluntarily. Like, you can't really feel too sorry for Jenny when she's putting her hands up for 60 minutes interviews. But I'm happy for them that phase of their life is over, because I can't think of anything worse.
Same. Yeah, and like looking forward, I'm interested to get your thoughts on what sort of Prime Minister do you think, what sort of ex-Prime Minister do you think Scott Morrison will be? So there's kind of like Kevin Rudd, who's never really gotten over what happened to him when he was leader. There's Julia Gillard, who largely stays silent about her time. Malcolm Turnbull, who likes to come in with a few pot shots every now and again. What's ScoMo's style going to be?
Aren't we lucky that we just have so many to choose from, like so many different examples these days? Look, one thing that was encouraging about this interview was that he said that he'd taken up golf and was spending a bit of time there, because I think the issue with some of these former Prime Ministers is that they don't have enough hobbies, and they spend their time, doing interviews and weighing in and writing op-eds and just kind of throwing in their 2 cents where it's not necessarily wanted. So what Julia Gillard does pretty well is other things, like other than being an ex-Prime Minister. So, I guess it's a good sign if he's got a hobby. He's staying in Parliament for now, so we are, still, I think, going to be hearing from him on political issues for a little while. But, I hope that he just sort of stays out of it a little bit. I feel like that's the classy thing to do.
I agree. And I think that he will. I get the sense from him that Scott Morrison's not an ideologue, right? He doesn't really care a lot about particular issues where he's going to go into bat for them, in the way that Paul Keating will pipe up every time there's anything about superannuation. I don't feel like Scott Morrison has any of those pet projects that he cares about enough. I reckon that he will be he'll be a quiet Australian. He'll be a quiet, respectful former PM. That's my prediction.
Yeah, you kind of get the impression that he's sort of ticked the box by being Prime Minister. He's like, yep, that's what I wanted to do, done the job, can move on to, with whatever's next for my life. Whereas some of the other examples, like a Kevin Rudd, was like all about that power and all about those issues, and it just wants to kind of cling on to it forever.
Yeah, I think so. So, yeah, well, just a humble backbencher, Scotty.
Yeah, no wrecking, no sniping.
That's it. Remember, Flash Drivers, if you're loving the podcast, let us know. Subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Everyone needs to be across the news of the week. Now, if you've been online for even just a minute over the past week, you've probably been bombarded by the drama around a movie called Don't Worry, Darling. There have been rumours of behind-the-scene fights, love triangles, and stars falling out publicly. It's juicy stuff, but the controversy kicked up a gear this week when this video went viral from the Venice Film Festival that appeared to show Harry Styles spitting on his co-star Chris Pine. Cue outrage and internet sleuthing. Liz, you can't have not seen this video. Tell me, once and for all, did Harry spit on Chris?
100% apparently he did. I mean, it appears that he did.
Well, Chris's people came out today and they said that it was a ridiculous story and a complete fabrication, did not happen.
Well, it's obviously a ridiculous story, and that's why everyone's into it so much. It's just insane.
I mean, I watched it and I'm not convinced that he did spit on him. I just think that it just was like a weird kind of coincidence and looked like maybe something happened but nothing did.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. What do you think?
It could be. I'm leaning more towards that it happened, or that he like at least sort of pretended that it happened. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at this with like a forensic eye, but yeah, I saw the video and I saw the memes like kind of before I had any idea what the actual drama was about, and I feel like I'm not alone there. Like, we have had so many people looking at this story, so many people, so many of our readers kind of coming to us like through Google, obviously searching like, what the hell is this thing about? I had no idea what DWD was. And I feel like that's a sign that, something's like really blown up really quickly when you get to know the acronym before you like find out what it actually is.
Right. Well, so this latest thing with the spit only like is the icing on the cake of a big drama around this movie, which I will try to explain for people not across it right now. So if you've not followed the saga, so Don't Worry Darling is a mystery thriller directed by Olivia Wilde, starring Harry Styles and Florence Pugh as a 1950s couple. Now, Shia LeBeouf was originally cast as the leading man, but he left the film under a cloud, and Wilde claims he was fired, but LeBeouf says that he chose to leave himself. Then, a video leaked of the director seemingly speaking to LeBeouf. This is what she said in the video.
Shia, I just went riding my horse, very sweaty, but I wanted to reach out because I feel like I'm not ready to give up on this yet, and I too am heartbroken, and I want to figure this out. And I think this might be a bit of a wake-up call for Miss Flo, and I want to know if you're open to giving this a shot with me, with us. If she really commits, if she really puts her mind and heart into it at this point, and if you guys can make peace, and I respect your point of view, I respect hers, but if you guys can do it, what do you think? Is there hope? Is there hope? Will you let me know? Okay, bye.
So Liz, the plot thickens. So there's also this drama around Shia LaBeouf and the director and their relationship with Florence Pugh, who she hasn't been doing a lot of promo for the film because she's apparently like a bit off it. It's juicy stuff, isn't it?
And doesn't it all, or like part of the drama, stem from everyone being mad, or Florence Pugh particularly being mad at Olivia Wilde for allegedly having an affair with Harry Styles while she was still with her husband? It's so messy. But yeah, I mean, it's like you can see why it's so captivating.
Right. Does any of this drama make you want to watch the movie more or less?
Well, I had never heard of this movie. I probably wouldn't have had any inkling to go see it. And now I know what it's called. I know who's in it. I know who's directed it. That's like more than I can say to, I think probably any movie that's come out in the past like 5 to 7 years. And, what's the criteria for going to see something at the movies? Like, that it's on and you go and see it. Like, I think this is an absolute masterstroke in publicity, if that's what it is. Never seen a film get this much publicity. I think it's just extraordinary.
Any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, and what's amazing about it is that this kind of latest drama, the spitting thing, no one seems to know what's behind it. And potentially the reason for that is because it didn't happen, because we're kind of all making it up. But what about Chris Pine just coming up out of this as like the absolute hero? He literally appears to be the only innocent party in this cast, if he is.
Yeah. And so I was talking to one of our producers, our social media producer, because I was like, get me across this. She said there's so many other threads, right? So now apparently there's rumours that Harry Styles and Olivia Wilde are no longer together and that they're estranged and that, that they were a bit weird at the premiere themselves. And there was another thread about Florence Pugh saying there was too much sex in the trailer and that everyone was like, she was like, this is not what the movie's about. I can't believe you showed so much sex. And that Olivia Wilde's like, why can't we show female pleasure on the screen? And so now that's part of why they've fallen out as well. Can you bear it?
Look, it's a lot. It's a lot. Some of it I feel like is sort of grasping. It's just kind of adding to the drama. Is this really something that people, that these guys are feuding about? Or is it, is it just kind of, everyone kind of wants another headline about this. And so the machine is sort of being fed that way. I find it odd that, from the little that I know about Florence Pugh, that would be kind of her complaint or her takeaway. Like, I mean, she's, seems to me to be a kind of, like forward thinking, probably more of like a sex positive sort of person in that space. I mean, some of it's odd, some of it's like a little bit cringy, some of it's a little bit boring, but overall, I think we just needed this saga. We haven't really had something that you can like really, sort of sink your teeth into, but also doesn't really seem to have great consequences. So.
No consequence. And that's why it's so brilliant. That's why it's so brilliant.
It's just gossip. It's just drama.
It's great stuff. And I'm with the person who tweeted that I don't really want to see the movie, but I want to see the 5-part behind-the-scenes documentary about the drama behind the movie. Sign me up for that. And that's definitely
coming. That is 100% coming.
Yeah, coming soon to Flash, I hope. Let's see if we can get it on the platform. Love hearing us analyse the biggest and smallest headlines each week. Make sure you follow us on the socials so you don't miss any content. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. We're everywhere. Get on it. We're all living our lives more and more online, be it through work, shopping, and to interact with our friends and community. But the internet is becoming an increasingly toxic place with cyber harassment and online abuse rampant. One person who's had enough is Sky News host Erin Molan. Her new documentary, Haters Online, Erin Molan Fights Back, will air this Tuesday at 8 p.m. on Sky News Australia, and Erin joins us now. Erin, welcome to Flash Drive.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
No worries. Congratulations on the new doco. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm getting a sneak peek tonight. But for everyone else, what can they expect when they see it?
Yeah, it's it's certainly not what I expected when I started out. As is often the way as a journo, you sometimes have a preconceived idea of how something will look, and this has been very different in a good way, to be honest. I kind of thought that I was fully across the online world and the risks that it posed because of what I've gone through and the passion that I've had in this space for a very long time and the advocacy that I've done. But it's actually terrifying. There is so much that I didn't even realise. And looking at what I've gone through and thinking that was pretty bad, to talking to parents who have lost children to murder, a murder that was planned entirely via social media. The dangers are terrifying. And we're amazing in this country in that, we've led the way when it comes to online safety legislation and laws in this space. But with anything, it moves and changes so quickly that we cannot afford to be left behind on any level. So people will see a real sinister side to social media. They'll be confronted, absolutely. They'll see normal, everyday people who have had their lives completely ruined by social media. This is not about reality stars or influencers or even celebrities. Everyday people who have had their lives ruined by this. And hopefully they'll understand that this is a serious issue that needs a lot of focus.
For sure. I caught one of the promos with you from Sky News today, and it's actually really emotional. You're looking down the barrel in tears. You feel this very deeply. This is something that's very personal to you, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I mean, I still, oh God, I cringe. But I think the point that I wanted to make in doing this was to really demonstrate to potentially people who prior to watching this may not have thought that it's a real issue or might have thought that that online abuse and threats and bullying is really just pretend, or it's not serious, or it doesn't have the same impact that when this kind of thing happens in real life. And that's just not true at all. In fact, quite the opposite. We found it's almost more damaging. And I guess for me, so much of my coping mechanism in this space, because I've been subjected to some pretty horrific things over close to a decade, has been to completely avoid it. And that's how I've survived, essentially, and continued to function, was to not look at anything. I don't read articles about myself. I haven't in a few years now. I don't read comments. I don't look at anything else on social media that's not my own. I don't even read the comments on my own page most of the time. And that's how I've survived. So to be confronted by a lot of this stuff that I've tried to avoid for a very long time has been incredibly emotional for me. But the thing that really struck me as I went around the country and we spoke to people internationally as well, I think it was very healing for me. And that sounds really wanky. I'm not a kind of person that talks in that way, but to have what I went through validated in some ways has been really quite incredible, because for a very long time I felt quite weak and embarrassed, and I felt, people's reaction was often, just ignore it, it doesn't matter, that's not true, and blah, blah, blah. And that almost takes away from what you're going through, and you think, oh, God, it's not legitimate that I feel scared or that I feel distressed by what's going on. But having spoken to so many experts and other victims, it's made me realise that actually the way I felt and the real low places this took me was absolutely an expected response to what I went through. So it's been quite healing for me in that way as well. Also quite confronting, but more healing.
It's good to hear that it has been therapeutic for you. I mean, You've been very open over the years about the sort of abuse that you've received. It's shocking. I mean, what is some of the worst stuff that you've copped?
I think the stuff that really impacted me, and it's a really good question, because on face value, the threats towards my unborn child, the threats towards my daughter, the threats to rape her, that stuff is horrific, and that stuff really knocks you around. And I've had instances where people have, and it's not even people that hate you necessarily. Sometimes they're people that just develop these obsessions that then show up in real life. And that's what the documentary shows, is that what can start out as an online threat can result in someone actually turning up to your workplace, turning up to your home. So that was awful, and that's probably the hardest. But the other side is sometimes just this torrent of abuse that in the early days particularly, not so much now, I cope much better with it now, but in the early days really starts to impact how you feel about yourself. You can get to this space where you feel like you don't realise that it's 10 people with 10 accounts each who are sending you, awful things. You feel like it's the whole world. You feel like everyone hates you. You feel like, you don't understand why you're being subjected to it. And that really can really screw with your confidence and screw with how you feel as a person, which is when I kind of started to think, my God, I'm an adult and I've got coping mechanisms. I'm resilient. I've got great support around me. How do 15, 16-year-old kids who are vulnerable handle this? And a lot of them can't. And that's a big issue.
Mm. And you touched on this earlier. A lot of the advice to people when they are in the centre of this kind of abuse is to simply ignore it. But you're fighting against that idea, aren't you?
Oh, completely. Look, that's an archaic attitude. And I get it, because people who cared about me deeply and still do would say that to me. And the intention was absolutely 100% good and noble. And to be honest, when there was nothing else to do, you almost had to. You didn't have a choice. But by ignoring it, we let the perpetrators win, and we allow them to continue to do what they're doing to us, to other people. And it's like in any walk of life, and the online space cannot be any different. If someone broke into your shop, trashed it, threatened you with a machete, stole your money and left, no one would ever say, just ignore it. If someone walked up to you in the street and said, I'm going to kill you and I'm going to rape your 2-year-old, you'd go to the police. It just doesn't exist anywhere else, and the online world can be no different. It can't be, because we now move seamlessly between the online world and the real world. So that attitude is archaic, and all it does is enable these perpetrators, and they are perpetrators. I hate the word trolls. I know that we use it all the time, and I use it and everyone uses it, but it almost doesn't give enough credence to who these people are. It's almost a little bit too cartoony for me. They are perpetrators. And that's the point of this. We're not talking about just people who are, who write mean things or say that you're ugly, or, that's whatever, that's mean, but free speech, etc., etc. We're talking about people here who want to do serious harm and damage to other people and use the online space to carry that out.
100%. I mean, it seems to me that the problem with this is because of the way that social media is set up, people can remain anonymous. So, what can we do to fix that?
Yeah, look, it's things that we're already doing and hopefully we'll continue to do, and it's taking away their anonymity. That's one of the greatest weapons that these people have, and essentially creating consequences for behaviour. It's when you look at kids, my daughter, if she won't eat her vegetables, and she doesn't most of the time, she's horrendous. But, Eliza, you can have chocolate if you eat your vegetables. She knows there's a consequence of not eating them. She won't get her chocolate, so she'll eat them. And look, I'm not saying that's a parenting technique everyone should adopt because it's probably wrong, but there are consequences to her actions. But in the online space, up until very recently, and still in a lot of ways, there's just no consequences for these actions. So people who enjoy sadistically doing harm to others are never punished. They're never held to account, and often they're never identified. So it's removing that, and you remove that, and you suddenly end so much of this problem because, at the core of it, most of these people are cowards. 99.9% of them would never say it to your face, would be terrified if their partners or their parents or their kids knew that they were doing it. They would be absolutely mortified. So you take away their anonymity and you take away a lot of their power. And that's the other thing in this doco that's quite incredible. I've got this image of a troll is this loser in his mother's basement with no job, and that helps us cope, victims of this, because we like to think it's a loser. But these are actually quite normal people who live normal lives, who have kids, who have partners, who are lovely in the office, who donate to charity. Like, it's so bizarre, the profile of some of these trolls and these people that do this kind of thing. That's the other thing that really blew my mind.
I mean, have you got any insight into what the psychology of it is? Why do the people do this? Why do they say such hateful things? Is it about them trying to give themselves more power, or is it just, the worst side of human nature unchecked?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we cover this a lot in the doco, and there's people that have dedicated a large chunk of their lives to trying to figure this out. And you look at, there's a bit of the old hurt people type thing, but a survey that one of the girls we spoke to, one of the doctors, did, a survey of Australians found that 50% had admitted to doing something online that intentionally harmed someone else. 50% of Australians. So we're not talking about evil people. And if we are, then God help us all. I like to believe that people are inherently good. But there is a real psychology to it. And it's often, I think, one of the issues is that, I mean, it sounds ridiculous now, but some people may not genuinely understand the damage they're doing. But I kind of, that doesn't carry a lot of weight with me. I think there's been enough awareness now. But look, there's lots of different reasons, and we go into it in a fair bit of detail in the doco.
Fascinating. Well, look, it's a really courageous campaign, and I'm sure the documentary is going to cause a lot of ripples when it airs next week. You can catch the documentary Haters Online, Erin Molan Fights Back at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, or catch Erin every Sunday at 7 p.m. on her weekly show, Erin, on Sky News Australia. Or, of course, you can catch up anytime on demand on Flash. Erin, thanks so much for your time.
James, really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the chat, and thank you so much for your interest.
Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Liz, thanks again for joining us on the podcast. Could I invite you back next week, please?
Please, I'd love to. Thanks for having me. It's lots of fun.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. And everyone, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. If you enjoy the news and this podcast and want to learn more about Flash, you can sign up at flashnews.com.au. Flash lets you stream more than 25 news channels in one place. New customers get 14 days free. Start streaming your news today.